I'd like to introduce myself and welcome everyone that is currently joining our webinar this evening. I'm Char Glacy, and I'm the chapter chair of the Explorers Club, the San Diego chapter. And this must be about our 8th or 9th webinar. We are really hopeful that it won't be long before we'll start having in-person meetings and dinner meetings like we used to have in the past. And as soon as that happens, I will be sending out announcements and flyers to that effect. But until then, we're so pleased to be able to do these webinars and have a number of people who appreciate watching our guest speakers. As you know from past webinars that you might have been on, we don't have a chat, it's disabled, but what we'd really like you to do is use the Q&A. And Steve assured me that during his talk, if you have a burning question, to go ahead and put it in the Q&A and we'll try to get it answered for you. And if we can't answer it during, we'll at the end have an opportunity for questions and answers. I would like to make a couple of announcements. The first one is we've got a field trip planned for March 26th. And it's mainly geared for members of San Diego chapter and chapter supporters. It's limited to 25 people. It is a geology field trip that goes about 4 miles round trip from La Jolla Shores to Black's Beach and back. And we've got 2 esteemed members of our chapter that's leading it. One is Tom Lamb, he's a geologist, and the other is Martha Shaw. And they both know a lot about the coastline. And if you're interested in wanting to attend, certainly drop me a note if you haven't received the flyer on it, or if you have, make sure you contact Tom Lamb and sign up for it, because again, it's only 25 people that are going to be permitted to go. So, and then the other thing I have is Perry Clem, who is one of our members. She recently has a book published, and we're hoping to have her as a dinner speaker, crossing my fingers, in June to talk about Oromo people, their dress, and sign her book and make a very nice presentation. So we're very proud of Perry. So that's all I think I have. Next, I'd like to introduce David Dolan. David is our Vice Chair of Programs, and David will introduce Steve Elkins.
Excellent, thank you, Char. And I do encourage you to sign up for the field trip that Martha and Tom will be leading. I've seen the research and work they've done into developing it. And as Char has mentioned, it's limited to a very small number of people. So, as my professor in college said, that a word to the wise is sufficient. Sign up now. So, in any event, and I may make a note too about Perry Clem's book. And Nancy, Nino, and I have our copy. We can't wait for Perry to sign it, but it is an exceptional book. I have how many 3 graduate degrees. I lose count sometimes. I've read a lot of these kind of books. This actually is one of the best I've read. Well researched, well footnoted, great illustrations. If one was a college professor, this would be a great book to assign because it's a delight to read. But it's very thorough and interesting. So we can't wait to host Perry in June, and we're not sure where that's going to be yet, but we have lots of options, and we look forward to that. Now, to tonight's program. Steve Elkins, how can you do somebody? You know, sometimes you can say, sometimes so-and-so needs no introduction, but, and that, well, is somewhat the case with Steve, but we will say a few words about Steve. Steve who also is a very dear and good friend, he is one of these jack of all trades. He's a Renaissance man. He's worked in television for over 30 years. He's an Emmy-winning cinema photographer, editor, and producer. And he has fallen into this one project, researching this unbelievable prospect of a hidden city in Honduras, working with his partner, Bill Benenson, and they've discovered lost cities. It's been featured in articles, New Yorker, Nat Geo, CNN, CBS, Sunday Morning, New York Times, and a best-selling book, an extremely best-selling book by Doug Preston, Lost City of the Monkey God, which, I had several friends send me copies of this book, because this book is up your alley, so, and they were right. And so I had lots of extra copies to give to other friends, because my friends thought I'd like it, and indeed I did. This is published now in, 30 languages or so? Pretty amazing. Not to be left off with one best-selling book. There's a new book that just came out called Lost City, Ancient Tombs. And it has the introduction by Doug Preston, who wrote Lost City of the Monkey God based upon Steve's expedition. And it has 100 discoveries that changed the world. And, it's a who's who of discoveries. Everything from Titanic to, other antiquities which you'd recognize, but I'm not going to go through all. But one of them is the Lost City of Monkey God. So, and this hefty book, but I recommend that. I would like to say one other thing before I conclude my remarks about Steve, and actually two things. One is, I don't know if you can see this, you can't, but you get the impression. Steve is the chapter chair for the Southern California chapter, and he is a total of 13 members of the Explorers Club, and it's like herding cats. These are all the alpha males and alpha females of the Southern California chapter with leadership skills, and Steve's working with them to reshape a wonderful chapter to develop new programs and activities. And it's an amazing group, and I will attend every meeting I can that you organize. Now, finally, I want to say something. I wrote a letter back in January 17, 2022, to Dr. Martin Nuila, who's the Vice President of the Flag and Honors Committee of the Explorers Club. And in it, I sent this to him. He's chair of this committee, and to the members. And I said, I want to nominate Steve to win the Citation of Merit Award from the Explorers Club, which is a very high honor. And in this letter, I write about all the stuff they did, and I talk about that few expeditions have captured the imagination of the general public, and Explorers Club members like the Lost City of Monkey God, and he led a team of archaeologists, anthropologists, scientists, filmmakers, and found the cities, and so forth and so on. Talk about the fact that they end up getting the exotic diseases, had none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci help deal with the cure of this disease, and I'm sure Steve may mention that. This is before Dr. Fauci became a household name. He's been featured with Nat Geo, Discovery, and so forth. And I said, this guy ought to receive the Citation of Merit. And guess what? This morning, Richard Garriott, the president of the Explorers Club, has announced the award winners of this upcoming ECAD, which is always sold out. And Steve Elkins will be getting this year's Citation of Merit Award. Congratulations, Steve. Well deserved. And now please share with us about this amazing expedition that caught the attention of the Flag and Honors Committee and that we will all celebrate and toast to in April 23rd in New York City at the annual dinner of the Explorers Club. Steve.
Well, first I want to thank Dave. I want to hire you as my PR person. You're great. In any event, I know some of you have probably seen a presentation before or seen we have a documentary currently on Discovery Plus, been on Nat Geo and so on and so forth. So I apologize if some of this is redundant to some of you, but there's always new stuff that I say because it's a very long and complicated story. I thought to begin with, I'm going to show a 2-minute clip. It's like a trailer for the documentary. So those that are not familiar with it will at least have a little bit of an understanding, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to share my screen, which is all you people know with Zoom now. Everything takes a moment to get set up. All right, and let's see, it's all optimized for that. Now I can share it. You can see my desktop, but not for long. Hopefully that's the last time you see it. And here we go.
Who's afraid of the curse of the lost city?
The mythical White City, where an ancient civilization once thrived.
It seems to have inspired everybody to try and find out, does it exist or does it not?
We're headed through very dangerous areas controlled by drug cartels.
We're just getting over a coup in this country.
We are under the spotlight. Who are these guys? What are they here for?
Ciudad Blanca is a place of great riches and treasure. We would have been marked as treasure hunters coming to steal Honduras' cultural patrimony. Legends are part of the Honduran national psyche.
You just mentioned a name, Ciudad Blanca. You can see the fear go across their faces.
We've got a technology that makes it possible to see what's in a large area.
We're shooting laser pulses out of the bottom of the plane. If something is there, we'll see it. Those are absolutely, without question, archaeological ruins. It's a site.
This is what we're looking for.
When you fly over this valley, you look down, it looks like a tropical paradise. But when you're actually in it, you realize that this is a really unfriendly environment. We are not welcome there.
Whoever goes in, they cannot make it out alive. So maybe that's why it's been so secretly safe.
Some people's bug bites didn't go away.
The parasite's killing everything.
It's absolutely terrifying.
Something told me that there's more to the story than meets the eye.
Wow, wow, wow. Look at this.
All right, well, now you all saw that, and I hope it gives you a little flavor of what I'm about to tell you. Interestingly, before I got involved in this, many years ago, when I first moved out to California, this was my business. I had built this giant truck that looks like a hot dog. This is Venice Beach, about 1980. And believe me, at that time, I had absolutely no idea that I would be involved in all this stuff. And I'm only mentioning this because if there's any young people around wondering what they're going to do in their lives or what may happen to them, you never really know. You just have to have the spirit to go out and discover and explore and try new things. The beauty of life is you never know where it's going to take you. And at this time in 1980, all I was looking for was the lost bag of French fries that I had to heat up to serve our customers. Well, the story of the lost city goes back a long ways. It actually started about 500 years ago with the conquistador Cortez, who had heard about this lost city somewhere in the jungles of eastern Honduras. And like all those legends, supposedly there was a lot of riches there and so on and so forth. And he tried to find it and didn't have any luck. But the legend started. They called it, well, it had many names, but the most common name in Spanish was Ciudad Blanca, White City, because there's a lot of white rock outcrops in the mountains nearby, and people claim because it was limestone, it had a lot of caves, and they thought that's where they lived, and so on and so forth. It got that name. Now, the Explorers Club, strangely enough, in 1977, if you look at the second item on that index there, the Ciudad Blanca Quest by Frank Griffith Dawson, there was actually a group in the Explorers Club in the 70s looking for it, and they actually made a TV documentary with ABC Sports back in 1977. They did not find it, but they had quite an adventure. So there's a history even in the Explorers Club. Now, Honduras, for those of you that don't know your geography, here it is in Central America. You can see where it is in the middle of the country, roughly halfway between South America and the United States. The area of interest is the eastern part of Honduras called the Mesquite Jungle. And I made an oval here that shows you the province that it's in, Gracias a Dios, and also Alancho and Colon. This area is pretty much, until recently, unexplored jungle. There aren't very many people that live there. And it's considered to be one of the roughest jungles in the world, 50-meter, triple canopy, mountains, rivers, you name it. So it's unexplored for the most part. Back in the 1850s, the British produced this map of the area, and I outlined in red Portal del Inferno, the gates of hell. So you can tell what people thought about the place. It was considered a place you went in, but you didn't come out. Back in the 1930s, a lot of people started looking for this place. This is a group of actually a couple of famous archaeologists and explorers from the Smithsonian, which used to be called the Museum of the American Indian. And you can see they're very nattily attired, right out of an Indiana Jones movie. I mean, they're set to go. In the same time period, this is from Fortune magazine. There's an ad for cigarettes. And if you look in the middle, it says Explorer, George Captain Stuart Murray. He went looking for it, but of course, he couldn't go without his Camel cigarettes, and that's the only thing that allowed him to survive the rigors of the jungle. So the point is, this was a very famous legend. There is a close-up of that. Now, in the 1940s or late 30s and early 40s, there was this fellow named Theodore Moore, who turned out eventually to be a spy for us during World War II. But just prior to the war, he had gone there looking for it and claimed that he found it. And we came back and he brought back some artifacts. The New York Times made a big article. Their artist made this wonderful drawing of what looks like King Kong and all kinds of crocodile statues and monkey statues and so on. And they started the legend of the lost city of the monkey god and blah, 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 blah. It became all the rage. Turns out, we found out years later that Theodore Moore bought his artifacts. He actually did not find them. And he was actually going there looking for gold with a friend, and he lied about it. Strangely, after the war, a few years after the war, he wound up committing suicide. He said he was going to go back there, and he never went back, and then he killed himself. This fellow, Sam Glassmeyer, was a bona fide exploration geologist out of Santa Fe. And in the late 1950s, he actually went there, and he found a lost city. I don't know if it's the same place we found, because we have since found out there's actually quite a few lost settlements and cities in this area. But I love Sam. He's unfortunately passed away a number of years ago, but I love his outfit, the pith helmet, the cigarette, the pistol in his belt. He was the real thing. This fellow is Steve Morgan, who got me interested in it to begin with. I was in the television business and looking for some projects to do. I wanted to do something that dealt with adventure or science. So a director friend of mine introduced me to Steve Morgan, who was a treasure hunter, raconteur character. And he had written 50 little short stories about what he did or wanted to do. And one of them was about this lost city called Ciudad Blanca, or Lost City of the Monkey God. Steve is quite dashing. He was a good storyteller. And he convinced me to go with him to go look for this lost city, which I did in 1994. Now, along with Steve came his best friend from growing up, a guy named Bruce, who became our fixer in Honduras. And you can tell by looking at him that he is the perfect person right out of central casting. You didn't want to mess with him. Back in 1994, in our first foray, we traveled by dugout canoe, and we spent several weeks slogging through the jungle and going all over the place like this. It was quite rough. These canoes weighed about 50 million pounds. We'd put our stuff in there and we'd be floating, and then there'd be a shallow area, and we had to get out and drag it like we are here. And then all of a sudden, the bottom drops out and you're in 10 or 20 feet of water. You got to climb back in. It was really a tough slug. After a couple of weeks of that, we didn't really find much. We didn't find a city, and we were pretty exhausted. So this is a picture of some of us towards the end of that journey. I'm in the back leaning like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. We're quite exhausted. The fellow in the front with the stoner look is our indigenous guide. He was probably eating hallucinogenic plants. We had a former Special Forces guy on the right there who had a metal plate in his head for our security, and then various other people. Well, on that trip, I had an epiphany moment. We were high up in the mountains of the jungle after a long journey of several days with the canoe and hiking and so on and so forth. And we came upon this boulder. We found this wonderful petroglyph, which we outlined in chalk so we could see it. Now, I understand archaeologists tell me that's not what they do now, but back then they did. And you can see it looks like a person, a man probably, with some kind of a headdress or a mask. Looks like we thought a digging stick and a pouch with looked like seeds coming out of it. So the government archaeologist that was with us said, oh, it's probably somebody planting corn. I'm looking out in the jungle in front of me where I can't see more than 20 feet. And I'm going, well, if he was planting corn, there's no evidence of it now. You can't see 20 feet and it's just all thick jungle. At that moment, I thought, you know what? I know a little bit about ecology. I know about changing environments. I actually worked in paleoclimatology when I first got out of school. So I knew that things changed. And I went, yeah, there might have been farms here, but it's very different now than it was 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. So I thought that maybe there is truth to this legend. By the way, not everybody agreed this was a farmer. Some people thought it was a shaman doing some kind of a ceremony, but we don't know. Well, along that same trip, there were a lot of strange things that happened. For example, Steve Morgan, the treasure hunter fellow that got me interested, said, oh, there's a village down on the coast where all the people have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And I said, I don't believe you. Well, we went there, and sure enough, you can see there's 6 fingers on this fellow. So most of the townspeople had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Not necessarily functional, but they're there. And I believe this is probably because there was a lot of inbreeding. There wasn't really much opportunity to meet other people there. Well, in order to put together expeditions, it takes a lot. It's not just the will and the desire to go. It's not even just knowing where you think it is. You have to deal with politics. You have to get permissions. And this took a long time. Here's a picture of me meeting with some Honduran officials in the early planning stages. I had to make several trips, sell the idea, showing them where I'm going to go, get them to be convinced I'm not totally flaky and it's going to work out. So those of you that are considering doing ventures in different countries, be prepared to also be a politician. Well, not much happened from the 1994 expedition. A lot of years went by. We didn't find the city. I made a few trips. I hired someone from the Jet Propulsion Lab to do satellite surveys. I found some locations I thought looked promising, but we really couldn't tell what was there. I wanted to go by helicopter in 1998 and drop into some of these locations, raised the money, all set to go, and then Honduras had Hurricane Mitch, which totally devastated the country and wiped out any idea of going back there. So years went by. I kept on researching, figuring out someday I got to go back. Well, around 2010, 2011, I read about this new technology called airborne LiDAR, which uses pulses of laser beams to scan the Earth and create a 3D model of the surface. It's kind of like sonar, but uses lasers instead of sound. Well, in 2012, I was able to raise the money, get the permissions, and actually fly a mission with this plane and a LiDAR unit and all the scientists to run it and scan the areas of the jungle that I thought had possibilities for a lost city. These were areas where no one had any idea what was there. So this is what we're doing right here. Now, unfortunately, Honduras, it's pretty much been a narco state for a while. And there's a lot of drug trafficking problems, a lot of crime. It was much worse in 2012. So in order to take this technology out of our country, it was actually protected by the Defense Department. You had to get permission to take it out at the time. We had to provide military guards watching the plane 24/7. This is one of them. Well, after a few days of surveying, we actually would we'd collect the data. The engineers we had with us, some of them are working on a laptop, would process the data overnight. And then in the morning we'd get up and we'd try and see if they found anything. They would also satellite not satellite, but send via the internet the data back to Houston where they were from and have another team process the data and send it back. By the way, we stayed on Roatan Island when we were doing this, which is a pretty posh place at a very nice resort. So it really didn't look like expedition headquarters. That came later. This was pretty comfortable. Well, after several days of scanning and spending a lot of money, we found something very exciting. And this was the photographer with us captured the moment when I was told what they found. And you can see I was quite happy. This is what we found. This is a LiDAR image of the center of a valley that I was interested in. And right now you look at it, you look at the green, it looks like the top of a piece of broccoli. But underneath that is a lost city. The blue is a river that runs through it. Through the magic of digital technology, we can erase the vegetation and we see what looks like a moonscape, just what's on just the dirt itself. And if you look along the top part of the river and some on the bottom, you'll see there are all kinds of geometric shapes. And I've outlined some of them in this sort of pinkish red. And you can see plazas, you can see cylindrical structures, one that's Z-shaped and so on and so forth. And there's actually a pretty good sized pyramid in the middle of that. Well, we saw that and we went, you know what? It's really there. This is another version of the LiDAR, and you can look, the object on the left center is actually the pyramid, and there's a promenade with an indentation that comes down the pyramid and goes into this big plaza. Now remember that promenade where it enters the plaza, because that is a very exciting place we found out a few years later. This is a 3D representation of what the LiDAR does. You can actually see the leaves, the treetops. And then with the magic of digital technology, you can remove those treetops and you can see the remnants of the plaza. It's pretty cool stuff. This is what the terrain looked like from an airplane. Again, to me, it's like looking at the top of a piece of broccoli. The other thing is, even though it's beautiful, you have to think about if anything went wrong with the helicopter, where are you going to land? What are you going to do? How are you ever going to get out of there? Excuse me, I have to open up something on my other computer here for a second. Okay, didn't do it. It's all right. Anyway, because the terrain was so gnarly, this is one of our helicopter pilots, a Honduran Air Force pilot, who had a great sense of humor. As you can see, he said, "Stop screaming because I'm scared too." They were great, brave pilots, and they were nervous. Now, one quick little story. When we first went there by helicopter, we would always said we're going to take 2 helicopters at a time in case one goes down. Well, on our first foray, I had this helicopter that we actually flew from Albuquerque to Honduras. We wanted to have one really good helicopter we could depend on. The Hondurans only had Vietnam-era Hueys that were refurbished, and we didn't know if we were really going to trust them. So we would go fly 2 by 2. And on the first foray, we took off. We're in our fancy helicopter, and we're waiting for the Honduran one to take off. It's taking a while. It's pitching and yawing. It's going back and forth. And after about 10 minutes, it gets up, and we're starting to carry on and move on to the jungle. And all of a sudden, it disappears. I look back, I can't see it, and I'm going, we're in trouble. They went down. Everybody's dead. End of story. I'm in trouble. This is it. A minute later, we heard crackling on the radio from the Honduran pilot that he had a problem and he was able to make it back to base. And everybody was okay. So thankfully, we survived what could have been a very big mess. Oops. Interestingly, we still had to figure out where we're going to put the helicopters down. So as you saw, it's just all trees. How are you going to find a spot? Well, the Honduran military who we worked with said, "Oh, we'll just do some reconnaissance flights and we'll find a place." Well, they did. And they said, well, they found a place 20 miles away from where we wanted to go. And I said, well, that's not going to happen. We're never going to walk with all of our gear 20 miles. It's crazy. So again, LiDAR, we took our LiDAR data and we were able to process it and actually find an opening in the little river that ran near the lost city and created this view. On the left side is a bird's eye view. The blue is the river in its little clear floodplain with a couple trees in it. And there's a cross section in the main part of the picture, which shows you the elevations and the distance between the trees. I showed it to our helicopter pilot and he said, no problem, we can get in there, which we did. This is the first time we made the approach to the Lost City area, landing area. You just previously saw it on LiDAR here, and this is what it looked like in reality. So we were able to put the helicopter down in that shallow water or in the little grassy area to the right. Maybe it looks a little rough right now, but it worked out pretty well. And then we could cut down some of the vegetation and expand the landing area. We eventually built a camp nearby. And with our sense of humor, we called it Welcome to the Four Seasons Mesquitia. It's the UTL, which stood for Under the LiDAR. That was the name of our company, LZ, Landing Zone. This is our base camp. This was our dining hall and meeting area. And as you can see, because it's a rainforest, it rained all the time and it was quite muddy. The mud would literally suck off your boots. You just had to get used to it. This is part of our group having a relaxing rest after an afternoon. You can see everybody looks pretty exhausted, particularly me on the right in the chair, ready to pass out. These are accommodations. This is my tent and Doug Preston's tent, who is next to me. It's where we stayed for 10 days. The interesting thing that we basically had 3 sets of clothes with us. One that we slept in if we needed to. One that we went out all day in and got muddy and wet from the rain, which we then put on a clothesline and let the rain wash it off. And then we'd have a quasi-dry but not muddy pair of clothes we put on the next day. The terrain down on the ground was pretty rough. This is Woody. He was an SAS soldier, a jungle warfare expert. I hired 3 of them to help keep us alive because they knew how to survive in the jungle much better than I did. They were invaluable. And he was the lead person cutting with his machete through the terrain. We had to go up some hills. This is Chris Fisher, our chief archaeologist. And it's very tough going up those hills because it's raining and it's wet and it's muddy. And eventually we wound up putting poles in places or attaching ropes to trees to pull ourselves up. We also had to deal with what I call quick mud, similar to quicksand. So this little mud puddle here is actually could be quite deadly. As you step in it, you get sucked down and it keeps on taking you lower and lower and lower. Most of us were large enough that we could grab on a branch and keep ourselves from sinking lower. However, our chief anthropologist was a woman who's not too tall named Alicia. And she got stuck in there and couldn't get out. And she kept on saying, guys, I'm sinking, I'm really going down. And we went, yeah. You're not just joking, forget it. And she said, no, I'm really going down. It's almost at my waist. Well, we obviously didn't take any pictures because we panicked. And fortunately, we were able to pull her out. So this is something you don't really think about, but it's definitely an obstacle and a danger. Here's a picture of myself, Doug Preston, Honduran archaeologist on the right, Alicia behind me, and some Honduran soldiers that came with us to help keep us safe and watch what we were doing. We often would walk through rivers because it was much easier than walking on the terrain. Unfortunately, if you look on to your viewpoint, my right leg, there's a rectangular object. That's my iPhone I was using to take a lot of personal pictures. That was before they were waterproof. And I had a waterproof case that didn't close completely, and I trashed the iPhone on the last day and lost all my pictures. Kind of a bummer. Which brings me to this cartoon from the New Yorker, which I thought was very clever. Keep your eyes peeled for a place to charge our phones, men. So our expedition, like many remote expeditions today, we're highly dependent on technology, but we also have to do everything old school at the same time. I thought this was pretty funny. Here I am in the jungle looking at the pyramid that we found. And of course, where is the pyramid? Well, you can't see it because it's covered in vegetation. You have no idea except you start walking uphill. Well, fortunately for us, after several days of surveying the area and using the LiDAR to survey all the structures that we could see with LiDAR, we were saying, okay, well, what else is there besides these stone walls and buildings? Is there something more interesting? The end of a long day, we're wet, we're tired, we're wet, we're full of mud, we're kind of getting depressed, and we're walking back to our camp. And our cameraman, who's the last guy in the line, yells, "Hey, Steve, there are these funny looking rocks here that I just tripped on. I can't tell what they are." So we ran back, and this is one of the first things we saw. This picture of a jaguar primate shaman, so it's called a weird jaguar. We got excited, and I thought, oh, this might be a monkey god statue, fit the legend, until someone pointed out, well, you know, the ears are on the top, so it's got to be a feline. And I had to admit, yeah, you're right. It's not a monkey god, but it's a feline of some sort. Well, it turned out we found over 500 stone artifacts, sculptures of all kinds laying there. Now, this is after we cleared away the vegetation so you could see them. But it's quite a spectacular discovery. And this was right where the base of the pyramid and a little promenade goes into the main plaza. The archaeologists with us went crazy. They just couldn't believe that they found something like this. I think they were going to have a heart attack. Here's some more bowls with animal figures on them. Now, as exciting as all that is, you do have to worry about a few things in the jungle. This is a fer-de-lance snake, which is probably the deadliest snake in the Americas. It's got 1¼ inch fangs, which you can see quite clearly there, venomous and rather aggressive. So if you get bit by one of these guys and they inject venom, if you don't get anti-venom pretty soon, you're probably going to lose the limb where the bite was, be it your foot or your arm or wherever, and you could even possibly die. We had a number of these. We saw them every day. We had a couple close calls. Unfortunately, nobody got bit. However, the biggest danger in the jungle was probably one of the smallest. This is a sandfly, smaller than a mosquito. You can't even keep them out with mosquito netting. And like a mosquito, it sucks your blood in order to be able to reproduce. Well, unfortunately, there is this protozoan parasite that lives inside the abdomen there. And when he's biting you for blood, that protozoan goes into you. There were 1 million of these bites that we got. This is just my ankle after a short time. We had hundreds and hundreds of bites, every one of us. After a while, the bite looked like this. This is one of our team's knee. It looks like a bad mosquito bite. But wait about 2 weeks and it looks like this, really horrific. So what happens is this parasite, which is called leishmaniasis, of which there are 30 some odd varieties, turns out it reproduces in your white blood cells. It doesn't really eat your flesh. In the press, they often call it a flesh-eating disease. It's not. It just reproduces in your white blood cells. And in most people, some people have natural immunity. I apparently do. 60% of our team did not, 40% did. Your immune system goes crazy trying to get rid of it. And if your white blood cells are not able to kill it, then it just keeps on sending out more and more white blood cells. And this is actually a result of your immune system deteriorating your own body. These effects, these lesions are caused by your own body trying to fight the leishmaniasis parasite. Now, unfortunately, this parasite, which has been around for millions of years and affects mainly mammals, but it does affect some reptiles, is generally confined to a certain temperature band north and south of the equator. However, with global warming, the CDC now predicts it'll be as far north as Canada by 2050 and is already endemic in a couple of the southern states here. The version that we caught was analyzed by the National Institute of Health, and it turned out to be a version that not only causes these lesions, but it also, after a few years, if not treated with some very toxic drugs, will destroy your mucous membranes, and I'll leave you to figure out what that means. This is that same lesion after it's been treated with the drugs. He's got scarring, but at least the lesions are gone. Now, not everybody was able to completely get rid of the lesions. This occurred in 2015, and 7 years later, some of the people still have lesions that come back. Apparently, the disease can be repressed with the drugs, kind of like herpes. It hides, and you become immunocompromised. It flares up and comes back, and it may come back in different parts of your body, which has happened to some of our team members even today. Now, after we made this discovery, there was a lot of press, blah, 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 blah. The then president of Honduras, the guy in the white shirt, who, by the way, has now been indicted on drug charges and is supposed to come to New York for trial. He was a nice guy and he helped us a lot. So I'm sorry to say that he's got some problems of his own right now. But he came out to see everything with his entourage and supported what we were doing. He allowed us to start excavating. We got some money from National Geographic and from the European Union. And this is what started. We cleared everything, and this has been going on now for 7 years. As you can see, they start finding more and more things. Plenty of people working there. It's quite fascinating. These are some of the better bowls that they came up, stone bowls made out of basalt. I don't know how the heck they were able to drill these things out and make them. This piece is quite interesting. It is a vulture, which in Mesoamerican mythology is a very important figure. It means birth, death, or rebirth and death. The archaeologists think that because we found these 500 and some odd artifacts, basically in a small area between the pyramid and the main plaza, this object was found in the dead center, right in the middle of them. So they believe that when this city was abandoned, whenever that was, and for whatever reason, they placed this object in the middle and all their other good objects around it. We also found these, I call them emojis or protoglyphs on some of the stonework. To me, they reminded me of a storyboard because each one of these geometric figures is separated by a double vertical parallel line. And it turns out, according to the Mayanist we talked to, and he sent me this picture of what they call a sky panel from the steps at one of the big pyramids in Mexico, have similar symbols. So it means something. And it obviously means they had some kind of contact with the Maya. And in fact, just recently, there was a team of archaeologists that came by from the Lost City area a few months ago, and they did find glyphs that do look like Mayan glyphs. And they're quite excited about that. So it shows there's this interaction. This is an artist's rendering of what we think the city might have looked like in its heyday. You got the big pyramid on the right, and you got small little pyramids and buildings and so on and so forth. Again, this is an artist's rendering. We're just guessing, but it's probably reasonable that it kind of looked like that. The president, the former president, who's standing right here, was a big fan of the project, and he had this museum built just outside the jungle where we staged our equipment and our helicopters to go in there. The artifacts are taken out of there, they're curated, and they're on display for people to see. It's still going on today, it's still there. The country was so excited about everything, they actually issued postage stamps commemorating it. Now, not in a million years did I ever think anything I would have been involved in or did would have been on a stamp. I mean, fortunately, they didn't put my picture on a stamp. That would have been really embarrassing, but I'm pretty impressed they did this. Well, Doug wrote the book. It became a New York Times bestseller. And as Dave said, it's, I don't know, in 24 languages. It's in countries all over the world. This was a ceremony the former president, who's to my left, and our ambassador at the time had for us in Honduras to promote everything that was going on, that Doug Preston, the writer on the right. To show you the reach of the book, I know it's not the most popular country in the world right now, but this is Siberia, far north Siberia. It really has very little to do with most of Russia. There's a friend of mine who lives in Yakutsk, which is one of the coldest places in the world. And he got his copy back in 2018, I think. And he sent me a picture of him with the Russian version of the book. But it's in many, many other languages. Well, the project became so popular that in Honduras, they kept on having me on TV talk shows, which is really funny because I don't hardly speak any Spanish. But in the area that you can't see, I had an earbud, and they'd have somebody doing rapid fire translation back and forth. It was a lot of fun, but I was really happy about it because the people were behind the project and they felt very happy to have something that they could actually be proud of. Even the young people, some of them put on made a video game. So that became quite popular. Who would have thought? A famous composer in Honduras wrote an opera, a play, and he called it La Ciudad Perdida del Dios Mono, Lost City of the Monkey God, The musical. Music's quite good. I don't think it ever made Broadway, but I have a recording of it, and once in a while I'll listen. Even here in the States, in Boston a couple of years ago, I found a escape room that someone copied, and they made the Lost City of the Monkey God escape room. So the legend, the story, and everything we did somehow became embedded in the global consciousness and still is. One of the benefits of that is that it influences how a lot of children think about things. The Hondurans, much to their credit, put together an educational display that they brought to different areas for children to look at models of the artifacts, dioramas, play the video game, learn about the wildlife, and so on and so forth. And I saw this youngster looking at one of the artifacts and looking at the wonder in his eye. And to me, I felt this is all worth it. Better than all the accolades, better than everything else. Here we are, our project is influencing the young people to be proud of their heritage and maybe influence them to become an archaeologist, an explorer, or something. It's just nice to know that you made a difference in some young people's lives. Now, lastly, besides the archaeology, we noticed that the jungle was pretty much a special place. The animals were not afraid of us. The trees, as you can see, were quite large. It had been untouched for centuries. And we felt kind of it was our moral obligation to find out just how special there was, and is there something we could do to try and protect it? Because the forest was under pressure from loggers, from narcos, just population explosion, and so on and so forth. You can see here's a sample of the deforestation we saw on the way to our site. People would come in there and they'd cut the mahogany trees. They didn't even bother taking them out. They would then walk cows up there and they'd make that into a cattle ranch after a few years, destroy the rainforest. Well, we commissioned Conservation International, a big NGO, to go with about 15 biologists and spend several weeks in the jungle doing a biological assay. And they came back, it took them about 1.5 years to write the report. And it turns out the jungle is a very special place biologically. They found species they thought were extinct, they're still around. They found new species, plants and animals and insects. And they said this is one of the rarest places in the world and very critical for the ecosystems of the Americas. It happens to also be the heart of the wildlife corridor between North and South America. It's not that big, but it's very important and is definitely under pressure. Here's a picture of one of our wildlife cams showing you jaguars that we saw plenty of. In actuality, we officially renamed the site that we first found, the first city. It's called now Ciudad del Jaguar because there were so many jaguars around. Another very important animal that was found were these peccaries, these white-lipped peccaries. I call them the buffalo of the jungle, just my own term. There are huge herds of them, sometimes 200. They roam through the jungle and they pretty much mash everything and eat everything. But they're very important to the ecosystem because they turn over the dirt and they create little microenvironments for all the other organisms right up the food chain. Unfortunately, they're very tasty. The ribs are really good. And the first example of a forest that's under pressure is these guys disappear because people come in and kill them for food. Fortunately, there's still quite a few of them there. Now, knowing all that, with the former president, we formed a foundation called the Caja Camasa Foundation to protect the natural patrimony as well as the cultural patrimony. And it's still going on, still going strong, although politics are always difficult down there, so you never know. This is the former president and I at the first excavation of the artifacts, just a PR picture. We also went on television there with a group of wildlife biologists from here, with some Honduran scientists and politicians, and there's me over on the right, and we're talking about what are we going to do about deforestation, how are we going to stop it. People were really into it in Honduras, and there is definitely a conservation movement there, even though it's very difficult politically to get some of the things done, but there are a lot of people there still doing good work. This is the foundation we formed. Caja Camasa is the indigenous Pesh word. The Pesh is one of the groups that live in the area for White City, for Ciudad Blanca. Now, I'm going to leave you with this little video that a colleague of ours, a very famous ethnobotanist named Mark Plotkin, who came with us to identify plants, made this a number of years ago that explains why it's so important for us to save rainforests, to save some of them at least. And I think you'll get the idea.
I have had people say to me several times recently, well, the Amazon, that's so 1980s. When I got into this business in the 70s, people would say, well, who cares about the Amazon? We have to worry about population growth. So now when people say to me, who cares about the Amazon? We have to worry about global warming, climate change. Well, guess what? It's all the same thing. Overpopulation drives environmental destruction, which drives climate change. The first essentially global report of climate change was 25 years ago. The Kogi Indians of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in northern Colombia said, hey, what are you knuckleheads doing down there? Our glaciers are melting. And everybody thought, ha ha ha, isn't that cute? Look at those funny little white hats. But that was a report that the climate was changing. We didn't listen, and we failed to listen at our peril. People need to be interested because, look, whether you're interested in changing climate, whether you're interested in too many poor people, or whether you're interested in drug-resistant bacteria, which is a much greater threat to our species than climate change, deforestation, terrorism, nuclear weapons, you have an interest in the greatest expression of life on Earth, which is the rainforest, which is home to most of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. And if you look at the record, 80% of our antibiotics come from nature. And as a student of history, I know that history often predicts the future. So where are the best antibiotics waiting for us? In the rainforests of today.
Oops. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. And I think the message that Mark has in that little video at the end is very prescient. It was made quite a few years ago. And look what's happening today. Disease, war, climate change, rising oceans. I hate to be a downer, but these are things happening. And we have to do whatever we can to try and adapt to it. The forces are bigger than us individually. So that's it. I'll take any questions. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a long story. I recommend, if you want to learn more, read the book, watch the documentary on Discovery Plus. There's a lot more detail. And I'll take any questions if there are any.
Steve, thank you so much. I mean, there was so much more to it than just finding the site and exploring the site. All that conservation work that you did was really outstanding and amazing. So I'm wondering, we've got about 20 attendees out there. I am sure that there are some of them that have a few questions for you. So I'm definitely going to open it up to, anyone in the audience. And I think David probably has a couple of questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me. So just from a logistic point of view, just at the bottom here, there's a place where you has a Q&A option. So please put any questions there so we can look at those. I also want to just give a special thanks for every tuning in, both now and the future. I know a good friend of mine, Alexis Smith, is watching from West Virginia, of all places, and we have people from various parts in the country and perhaps even the world. So we don't have everybody's last name, but we appreciate you taking the time to watch this. I'd like to also give a shout out to my friend Doug Henderson, who will watch this as it is recorded. He's the one who originally gave me my first copy of The Lost City of Monkey God. Among many of my friends who kept giving me this book, because everybody thought I'd love it. And yes, I do, and you will too. I'm hoping, I'd like to just a little aside here, that someday down the road, we might convince and maybe twist arms or whatever we have to do to get Doug Preston out here to San Diego to do a book signing of this book and others. And Steve can do another dialogue and talk, and we can show actually the video. So that's down the future when it's more comfortable to gather in person. I also want to just make a personal connection. Mark Plotkin talked about the rainforest as source of all these pharmaceuticals, all these resources, and so forth. Some of you know that, many of you know I got a double lung transplant over 4 years ago. And one of the traditional drugs they gave me actually literally destroyed my kidneys. It got to the point, just to the point where I almost needed dialysis. They said, oops, we need to try something else. So they gave me a different drug, and that drug did not cause any kidney damage. My kidneys recovered somewhat, but that drug was discovered on Easter Island. And who would know? But it was discovered by a expedition, and they found this pharmaceutical in the natural environment there. And I think, if any of you have seen the movie Medicine Man featuring Sean Connery, he was a biologist in the Amazon jungle finding the cure for cancer. But as if you remember that movie, he was up against these people burning the rainforest to have more cows, more corn, what have you, and they're destroying this natural resource that not only could provide medicinal properties and options, but also literally is the lungs of the planet. So anyway, all that said, I think Steve, your report's very timely and very important. Now, I also would also say, can you tell us a little bit about your encounters with Dr. Anthony Fauci? Now, I always see him on TV, and he's doing these Q&As and so forth. You had a one-on-one in your team, an experience with him. What is he really like?
Well, he was a very nice guy, very intelligent. We didn't know much about him. Actually, Doug's brother, who's also a writer, knows him. Richard, right. And he was, very helpful. He didn't treat us personally, but his team did. And they were great. I mean, the National Institute of Health happened to be doing a study about this leishmaniasis parasite because a lot of our soldiers were coming back from the Mideast with the desert version of it. It was never publicized, but a lot of people had these horrible lesions and problems, and they were trying to figure out a cure. They still haven't figured out a cure. So they were very happy. We were introduced to them by National Geographic, by a photographer that was with us, who got us in there, and they said, yeah, we'll treat everybody for free. We'll fly you out, we'll put you up for as long as it takes, but we want to use you to study. And everyone, of course, agreed, because where else are you going to go? Well, we went to a lot of doctors here in LA, New York, Chicago. Nobody even heard of the disease, or they read about it 30 years ago in a textbook and they had no clue. So they were great, and they did treat everybody, and they still are to this day, still monitoring the people that got it. So Fauci and his team, to us, they were like gods. Thank God for them. And it was really tax dollars well spent.
So David, there's several questions in the Q&A. Did you want to?
Let me summarize a few of them. For example, Jerry Coyman, who is one of our honored members of our Senator and medalists, no less. Jerry Coyman asked about how many other sites in Central America have been discovered with LiDAR since your experience with the Monkey God site. And he does say quite amazing talk, which is a nice compliment from this amazing explorer himself.
Well, I appreciate the compliment, and a lot of sites have been found. We actually found 3, all right, of which one that we've started excavating, one we've surveyed on the ground, and the other one no one's really been to yet. I'm convinced that the entire jungle was probably urbanized at one time. And in fact, our chief LiDAR guy, who's actually originally from Honduras, but he lives in Houston now, Dr. Juan Carlos Fernandez Diaz, he did some surveys with LiDAR in Guatemala in the Pitan jungle. And you may have read about it in Nat Geo and other publications in the last 2 years. And they found that all that jungle, in between all the famous Maya sites in Guatemala and Mexico, where people thought nothing was there, was completely urbanized. And they've upped the population estimates of the Maya by many millions because of that. There's roads, there's towns, farms, you name it. So LiDAR is the technology du jour. At the moment is the only thing and the best thing to survey the ground from the air and be able to see through the vegetation. There is no better technology as of now. So everybody's using it, and they're finding lost cities all over the place. And they're also finding them now under the ocean. This is a new technology. New ancient cities are now under the ocean. There's even one off the coast of La Jolla in 80 feet of water that Noah surveyed a number of years ago. So the earth is dynamic, the environment changes, and there's so much yet to be discovered.
Thank you. We do have a couple questions from Kim Wheeler, who, if she's talking about if she were to go to Central America, asking for advice on the medical protection of bugs and so forth. And if I might add, generally speaking, it's always best go to the U.S. Center for Disease Control website. They have an excellent resource. You can plug in the country and tell you what's needed and so forth. And but the other thing is, you have to realize once you walk out the door of your own house, you're vulnerable to any kind of thing, and it's kind of a calculation how much risk you want to take. I'm of high risk because of my immunocompromised condition. Well, I'd use a very, very good insect repellent. Thank you very much. And I'm not going to go swimming in fresh water. Any suggestions, Steve?
Well, we did all the things that a reasonable person would do. We checked with the CDC, we checked with travel doctors, we checked with other doctors. I got every shot. We took every kind of pill you could for all the known tropical diseases that we thought we would encounter. We had heard of leishmaniasis, but had considered it a remote risk. Little did we know, according to the researchers at NIH, they said, and it talks about it in the documentary, that we went into a very special kind of pristine environment, almost like a lost jungle. And a new species of leishmaniasis that was very virulent developed there. And we walked into it like fresh meat. So there's really nothing we could have done other than not go there or put ourselves in Ziploc bags. I mean, we used 100% DEET and everything. Didn't matter. You're going to get it or you're not going to get it. 60% did and 40% didn't. And people that still go there, the wildlife biologists and the archaeologists, they take that risk every time they go.
Well, I heard members of the committee of your expedition say, even though they did get it, they wouldn't trade for everything in the world. They just had an amazing, life-changing experience.
Yeah, some don't. Some say they'd go back, but there's a couple of archaeologists that will never go back in the jungle because they got it really bad.
I hear that.
We're done. Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's some things I won't do anymore either. I mean, at some point you do have limits.
Right.
Peter Pan can't always be young. Steve, I do have a request here from Debbie Kinsinger, who's interested in perhaps volunteering on a project there. If someone wants to get in contact with you, would you mind sharing your email, or how shall we get in contact with you for any ideas of future expeditions or opportunities?
No, they can have my email and my cell phone number. Be happy to hear from them. And I was looking at the Q&A briefly. I saw somebody asked, they've done a lot of stuff in jungles and want to get involved in conservation work. And I'd be happy to talk to them and turn them on to some people that maybe they can arrange to do that. In the end, Honduras is a troubled country. They just got a new administration, changeover in personnel, narco trafficking problems, money, the story. And it's amazing what some dedicated people are doing. They got a substantial amount of money from the EU to help keep this going. But the big problem is money. Getting the money to the right people to do the work is the biggest problem. And it's not easy. So if somebody wants to take that on, that's wonderful. And I'm happy to turn them on to the people and give them my 2 cents worth.
Okay. Well, that's very good. And what is your email address, Steve?
It's very easy. It's my name in reverse. Elkins Steve, ELKINS STEVE, 2 S's, no space, at me.com. It's an Apple email.
Thank you. That's
And I'll
good.
give you my phone number too, if anyone wants to call me or text me. 213-507-9017. I'll repeat that, 213-507-9017.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, uh, I have to say, Steve, I've heard you speak many times, and every time it's like the first time. I learned something every time, and and you're involved with some new projects too. I know some are very embargoed in terms of in its developed stage. Can you say anything about your future projects at this point?
Yeah, I'm happy to tell people about it now. For the last year and a half or so, I've been working on it's really a book project with a colleague from China that lives here in LA. And we're researching pre-Columbian maritime explorations of the Americas. It's been very controversial for a long time. And the people who studied it, the anthropologists that did decades ago, were considered outcasts. But it's coming into its own now because we find out more things. We're finding more sites. We're finding with genetics where plants and animals and people came from. I think it's going to go mainstream very soon. It's a fascinating subject, and every day I learn something new. That the world, people in ancient times went around all over the place, even thousands of years ago.
Yeah. One last question from David Press. Have you had any conversations with Wade Davis about this project? He's one of our esteemed anthropologists in the Explorers Club.
No, I have not spoken to Wade Davis about this.
Okay, well, we're going to see him in April, so that's the time to do it.
I'll see him on April 2nd at the Bowers.
Bowers Museum. Okay, well, I think that it comes to the end of our program, Shar. I think that covers everything. Thank you, Steve, and thank you all of our dear friends from all around the country and the world who tuned in and may tune in later, and the recorded version on the San Diego Explorers Club chapter website. So I'll turn it over to Shar to wrap it up. And again, thanks again. And do get the book. We will do everything we can to arrange a book signing down the road. It may take some logistics, but come hell or high water, and watch out for the sandflies. We'll do it.
Right. Well, I look forward to coming down there in person. And if people want to question me about it in person, it would be great, because the story is so long and so rich. It's very difficult to tell it in 40 minutes in a Zoom call.
It
And I'm
is.
just looking at a screen.
No, it was a wonderful presentation, Steve, and I can't thank you enough for, taking time out of your very busy schedule to spend an evening with us on our webinar. We have recorded it, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and that will probably not happen for the next, it'll probably be a couple of weeks before that's done, because I'm leaving town on Thursday for a bird survey in Mexico. So, but I will do it as soon as I get back.
Okay. No
Anyway,
worries.
thank you, everybody.
I know the story. Anyway, I thank those who watched. I thank you for watching. I hope it was enjoyable.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Steve. And David, thank you as well for being such a wonderful program chair.
Absolutely. Thank you.
He is the best.
See everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.